You've got an idea for a really cool Minecraft build. The shapes are just piecing themselves together in your outline, and it's all looking so good until you add the actual blocks. It's flat, it's boring, and your cool shape isn't anything like you'd imagined it. How will you ever recover? Well, you're lucky I'm here. Today, we're going to fix your problem with 2 words: build palettes. Minecraft build palettes are the easiest way to make it look like you know how to build something super cool even when you don't. And they're not that hard to make. Today, we're going to dive in together into my favorite build palette hacks and figure out just how we can take your Minecraft builds from boring to beautiful. First off, we're going back to art class. Let's take a look at a color wheel. In our wheel, we have our primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Primary is your red, yellow, and blue in a traditional color wheel. These colors are usually the first 3 paints they give you to try and mix other colors from that always end up a little muddy, but the teacher insists that you're not allowed to use pre-mixed colors from the paint tube because that's just cheating art. Another trio of primaries are cyan, magenta, and yellow, which are what printers operate off of. Secondary colors are orange, green, purple, colors mixed from your first set of primaries. Think Halloween colors. And tertiary colors are every other color on the wheel. They make a nice rainbow when put together. When building, consider the different color schemes. For example, monochromatic, one color, complementary, across from each other on the wheel, analogous, gradient between colors, and triadic, evenly spaced on the color wheel, just to name a few of the main color schemes. How can you use those different palettes to pick out your colors? And with Minecraft, there are so many more colors than just what we see on a plain color wheel. You'll find that you also need to consider the undertones of colors within the block itself. You may have a red like in concrete that is a very true red, there's not much variation. But there's also mangrove planks, which includes more warm orange highlights and overall a cooler red. You have to consider both types of undertones in that block when putting it in your palette. Different blocks will carry different undertones, and it's up to you to decide whether you'd like to match those undertones or contrast them. But it's good to build an eye and look at the pixels to make your call on which blocks to use. To put our color wheel in a better context in Minecraft, we'll add variation like this. And when choosing colors, you also want to consider your shade or lightness in the color. For example, a pink is a lighter version of red, and there are darker red shades from our original concrete too. Once you have your colors, you should ask yourself what sort of shades of those colors do you want to use? Do you want an overall darker palette, or are you going for something lighter? Do you want something high contrast with both light and dark shades, or are you going for a more neutral middle ground? You can also consider adding a neutral shade in, such as gray, black, or white, to make it so you can fill in other spaces on your build without making the colors too busy. Be sure to pay attention to the color undertones of your neutrals, since they can also be warm or cool like any other color. When you create a palette, you want things to look balanced. You don't want your palette to feel busy and heavy or too bland and empty. Unless, of course, either is your goal. It's Minecraft, I don't make the rules, I just tell you what I do. An easy way to do this is to ask yourself these 3 questions. Is there too much of one color? Does it feel too gray? Is one shade completely dominating the palette when you don't want it to? An easy way to fix this is to throw in a color on top of another. Pick something you wouldn't choose normally, or use a color you think would fit based on our color schemes. Even if it's just changing up the shade of one of your blocks, a small switch could make a world of difference for your build. Number 2, what color doesn't fit? Is one color just the wrong shade? Test removing a few blocks and looking at the palette again, and trust your gut on what you feel looks best. Change out colors for darker versions, or maybe try a warmer block where you had a cooler one. Mess around with what you have and use whatever you like best. And finally, how much texture do you have? Do you have any plain blocks? What blocks have patterns within them, and how many pattern blocks are you using? How many variations on the color are in just one block? And are there too many blocks with just too much variation? Judge how busy the palette looks, and try to establish some balance. Alright, so you've got at least an idea of your colors and textures, and now you're picking the specific blocks for each part of your build. What I usually do is break it down by thinking of my build as a puzzle, and considering each piece of my palette as a different section I'm putting together. I want each section to make sense on its own, so when I put all of my sections together, it creates a cohesive final piece. Let's say we're building a house, for example. I'd probably have a full palette that looks something like this. But in my palette, I would separate my sections into walls, roof, base/foundation, and my accent color for things like windowsills and maybe a feature wall. When I create these sections, I think of them as if I were going to paint my build or take a photo, aka I add a sort of real-worldness to the game with shading or color variation. For example, let's experiment with the walls. For this build, I want my walls to be a light, pale, neutral color. But in the real world, a white wall would not be completely white. The paint could be aged, or there will be shadow variation depending on what trims or other light limiting sources there are around it. To show this effect, I choose blocks with shades or textures that are near white. I'll start with a bone block as my quote-unquote pure white. Then I might fill in near to the corners with a mushroom stem. If I want to show an aged effect, I'll add some smooth sandstone, maybe with a block or two of another close shade to create a small gradient. For this specific wall, I want to keep my textures simple because I plan to add blocks with more texture later. I don't want my walls to be the main focus, and I want textured blocks to create the illusion of shadow, so I'm keeping my overall block palette for my walls simple. After I've worked through each section, I try to put all of them next to each other to make sure that each smaller palette is still cohesive in a larger one. I usually tinker around with it until I'm happy, and then I get to material gathering and building. I also try to create some rules for specific materials to make them feel more realistic. When working with wood, I try to use more textured blocks such as planks against stripped logs to create shadow or variation. I also like to use gradients, which work well when working with stairs, fences, or other wood blocks that aren't just full blocks to create shadow and depth in even smaller spaces. When working with stones, I think about the age of the stone and how that will affect the texture of it. I use different grays to build up depth, and I think about how the light may create a warmer look in a brighter area and a cooler in another. I also think about the real-world applications of different materials. Wooden beams for walls, concrete trim for extra support on houses, etc. Obviously, this doesn't extend to all blocks I use, but it's a good way to consider the structure of your build in conjunction with the colors and tie it all together nicely. The next time you don't know where to start on blocks for your build, come back to these tips and see if they spark some inspiration. And remember, you don't ever have to stick to the palette you create. If you find something that works better mid-build, use it! A good build palette is just a way to start off your Minecraft build and get those ideas really flowing. If you have any building requests for me, please drop them in the comments below. And if this video helped you, like it, save it for later, or subscribe for more building tips. I plan to start uploading at least once or twice a month now that I'm back, and I'll be sharing more tutorials and tips to make your worlds better than ever. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Sparte, and I hope to see you soon.